Justine Reed only had her father, Mark Reed. Mark Reed only had his mother, Alexandra Reed, and Alexandra Reed had no one. Now, let's stop shaking the Reed family tree for a second and go back 24 years to 1997. Alexandra Reed was Alexandra Shepherd at the time. She was only 3 years old when she was introduced to the word poverty, a word she didn't understand all that well. She was only 7 years old when she realized she was different from the rest of her classmates. And she was only 16 when she could finally change the world. Maybe not the whole world, but Lindsay Will's world for sure. Alexandra had a good father. Some would even say a wonderful father. But that wasn't enough for the world in which Alexandra lived. Murphy dropped out of school when he learned that his partner, whose name neither Alexandra nor we know, got pregnant and gave birth to little Alexandra. Since his partner didn't want the baby, Murphy decided to take full responsibility for raising her. He got a job at one of the local salt plants. The first time he heard the words, "Life isn't sweet," he laughed. The second time he heard them, he cried. However, this story isn't about Murphy Shepherd's job or his debt. It's about what happened to his daughter, Alexandra. Alexandra was a good student, even an excellent one. She maintained her GPA for years, and she had never missed a day of school in her life. She did it all to get as many scholarships in college as possible, so as to not overburden her father. What she didn't know was that her father had never set aside money for her college. He didn't even realize that he should have done it, thinking that college was free. All the teachers supported Alexandra in her efforts. Only a blind person didn't see how determined she was to make it in the world. In fact, getting to know Alexandra and her story, I started to like her very much. But then I switched to hating her just as much. But then I decided to stop out of simple respect for the elderly person. I loved her because of her determination, and that's exactly why I hated her too. It turned out that you can look at a seemingly positive quality from different angles. Alexandra, like any other teenager, had both friends and enemies, and her world was no longer divided into good and bad, but into very bad and not so bad. She had only one friend, and everyone else was her enemy. The not so bad for Alexandra was when someone cheated off her, and the very bad was when they got caught doing it. For Lindsay Will, the antagonist of our story, the world was divided into rich and poor. How did she come to this experience, you may wonder? Let's go back a little bit. Lindsay Will's childhood was just like that of any other average American child. In the morning, she ate waffles, 2 eggs, and bacon, and washed it all down with milk from old McDonald's farm. What could have gone wrong? Perhaps it was the TV Lindsay's father watched, or the cartoons Lindsay watched, or perhaps it was that homeless boy who burst her red balloon, or maybe it was the fact that her childhood was just like everyone else's. All I can advise in this situation is, don't try to understand why Lindsay Will was a bad person. That's just who she was, and there's no changing that. So, after graduating high school, Lindsay Will decided to become a teacher. Thus, Alexandra Shepherd and Lindsay Will's paths crossed. One was the student, and the other was the teacher. But everyone seemed to have forgotten that both of them were regular people. It all started when an English teacher at a California school got pregnant and went on maternity leave. "Lindsay Will is your substitute teacher." These words shocked me, but apart from Alexandra and me, no one seemed to have felt the difference. Fall changed into winter, winter changed into spring, and then came the summer, and I was still getting there with my mouth open. But Alexandra's world, the world I want to tell you about, was so much deeper than everything around it. Lindsay's hatred of the poor was way too obvious. Every day, the teacher called on Alexandra, and every day, Alexandra was supposed to answer questions on the previous topic. And every day, Lindsay was the one who looked bad. Anyone who got to witness the way Lindsay treated Alexandra thought the teacher's behavior was inappropriate. Not that they liked Alexandra, but they liked Lindsay even less. The onset of the rainy season was the worst time for Alexandra. Her father's money was barely enough for food and basic necessities, and Alexandra needed shoes. All the girls at her school could afford expensive ankle boots with rhinestones on the sides and natural fur on the insides, but Alexandra only dreamed of that one pair from the Demure store. She'd spend hours and hours, days and days hanging around the windows of the store, eyeing that pair of boots. Once she told her father about her dream, it would cost him dearly in the future. A change of shoes was mandatory at Alexandra's school. Students were also taught not to stand out from the rest, to sit up straight, not to yawn, and to completely wash off any individuality they had before they entered the school premises. Alexandra fell short of just one of those demands. She didn't have a change of shoes. The teacher on duty at school pretended not to notice it. Everyone knew her family situation, and she hated it even more than the food she had to eat and the mattress she had to sleep on. She hated the stares and Mrs. Benson's half smile with a touch of sympathy, even more than the world she had to live in. Everyone made concessions for her, but not Lindsay Will. Maybe it was because she wasn't from California? Or because she didn't see the line that separated the poor from the rich? No, Lindsay Will, on the contrary, was very much aware of this line and was frank about it, which is what Alexandra liked about her. The truth was that everyone was doing the same thing, only they didn't explicitly voice or show their thoughts and positions. What Alexandra hated more than pity and Mrs. Benson's sympathetic smile every day on her way to school were hypocrites, which they all were. Talking about all these feelings got us a little sidetracked from the main events I want to tell you about. It was Lindsay Will's first time on duty at the California school, the one that stood opposite Mrs. Bingle's candy store. And it was that day that Alexandra Shepherd's spirit was permanently and irrevocably broken. Alexandra hadn't changed out her worn-out sneakers, which had been torn for 3 years now. And thus, Lindsay Will grabbed her hand and smiled for the first time in 32 years. It sort of looked like a mouse stuck in a trap and a sly cat having fun with it. That's the philosophy behind the Tom and Jerry cartoon, which, by the way, had been Lindsay's favorite since she was a child. The teacher led her inside the classroom, gripping her hand tightly, as if she were about to run away. She invited everyone to chip in to help Alexandra. Having humiliated Alexandra, Lindsay went about her work, while the kids continued to laugh at Alexandra, nodding along, like a flock of sheep that Lep Kanziki was herding on the other side of the world. Lep loved his sheep. They were his only company, but Alexandra didn't love hers. She didn't cry or run away. She took her backpack and walked out calmly. All she left of herself was an empty space in the visitation lodge. It felt like the end of Alexandra's story. She didn't think that she could come back to that school, but Murphy Shepherd would go back instead. Having come home earlier than usual, Alexandra saw that her father was already home. Neither of them had the heart to ask what had happened to the other. One thing was clear, they were both deeply depressed. And for both of them, it had something to do with the beginning of the rainy season. 3 weeks later, the entire truth finally came out over dinner. I got fired. Lindsay Will humiliated me because we're poor. They both had serious problems, which had something to do with money. However, instead of solving their own problems, each of them decided to run away from their own issues and help the other one. Alexandra's father wanted to deal with the teacher who humiliated his daughter, and Alexandra went and got a job in a movie store. She was too young to work at the factory. "Come back in 3 years or so," said the angry man before closing the gates right in front of her. Murphy took money from his stash and headed for the school, but he stopped and looked over at Mrs. Bingle's candy store. He ate a brownie with a serious face and came out of the cafe with a big smile on his face. He went into Demure and bought his daughter a pair of ankle boots. No one can hide their smile after having one of Mrs. Bingle's pastries. Walking out of the candy store, Murphy Shepherd was faced with the real problem, the school. He went inside the building and brought his daughter a change of shoes. The other girl's shoes paled in comparison to the new Demure ankle boots. The sides of these boots were sparkly, from the newest collection, and that really sealed the deal. This caused Lindsay Will to cry out for the first time in her life. No one ever had that effect on her. She was usually the one making other people cry. The lights in the principal's office began to flicker, and he decided to check what was happening. Everyone was silent. No one dared to utter a word. But then, one of the teenagers couldn't stand the tension and told everything that had happened. Even more than he probably should have. The boy was very nervous. By the way, that teenager was me. After hearing the horrifying details of the incident, the principal fired Lindsay Will. Murphy Shepherd skillfully put the teacher in her place, and I'd even go as far as to say that it was rather tasteful. That, of course, didn't really affect the rest of their lives, but it sure did bring the father and daughter a little closer together.